It was a quiet night in a small suburban neighborhood. A warm summer breeze rustled the leaves outside, but inside the modest home, things were anything but peaceful. For 7-year-old Charlie, the night seemed to stretch on forever. He'd been lying in bed for what felt like hours, unable to fall asleep, when suddenly he heard it. A scream. A sound so sharp and full of fear, it pierced through the silence of the house. It came from his sister's room. His older sister, Grace, was only a few years older than him, but she felt like the world to Charlie. He admired her. She always looked out for him, taking on a motherly role ever since their mother had passed away a year ago. They'd been through so much together, but tonight something was different. Charlie's heart began to race as the scream echoed in his ears. It was a sound he had never heard before, the kind of scream that made his stomach turn, the kind that made his blood run cold. Without thinking, he swung his legs over the side of his bed and stood up. His small feet padded silently across the floor as he crept toward Grace's room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Charlie could hear muffled voices, deep, angry voices, and then another scream. His gut twisted. He knew what was going on in there. His stepfather, Rick, was in the room with her. Rick, a man Charlie had always been taught to respect, but a man Charlie had never really trusted. He had seen the way Rick sometimes looked at Grace. It wasn't right. It made Charlie feel uneasy. Grace had tried to brush it off, acting as if nothing was wrong, but Charlie could feel it. The tension, the fear. The way Grace would sometimes avoid eye contact when Rick was around. He'd seen it too many times. Charlie's breath quickened, and his tiny hands shook as he reached for the phone on his nightstand. He hesitated for a moment, not fully understanding what he was about to do, but then the fear for his sister overcame him. He picked up the phone, dialed the 3 numbers that felt like they were taking an eternity to enter. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, but it only made Charlie's nerves feel more raw. There's a man hurting my sister. His voice cracked as he whispered into the phone, trying not to let Rick hear him. The operator's voice shifted, becoming more urgent. Stay on the line. Help is on the way. Can you tell me your name? Charlie, he whispered. Charlie Harris. I'm 7 years old. Charlie, I need you to stay calm, okay? Can you tell me where you are? I'm in my room. Grace is in hers. Please hurry. Charlie, I need you to listen to me. Stay hidden and do not go near the door. Can you do that for me? Charlie nodded, though he knew the operator couldn't see him. His heart pounded as he tucked the phone under his pillow, trying to stay as quiet as possible. He had no idea how much time had passed. Seconds, minutes. It felt like an eternity, and each one felt heavier than the last. As he lay there, holding his breath, he could hear the faint sound of footsteps outside his room. Were the police here? Did they arrive in time? But then the sound of the door to Grace's room opened, slowly, cautiously. Charlie froze. He didn't dare make a sound. He prayed, in that moment, that whoever was coming would help Grace, that they would stop Rick. He didn't care who it was. He just wanted to make sure his sister was safe. A voice, one that wasn't Rick's, called out from the hallway. Grace, are you all right? Charlie's eyes widened. The voice was unfamiliar, yet it was filled with concern. It wasn't Rick's angry tone. It wasn't the voice of someone who meant harm. His heart skipped a beat as the door creaked open wider. The next few moments were a blur. There were voices, more footsteps, the sound of doors opening, and then silence. It was deafening. And then the police arrived. By the time the officers entered the house, Charlie had heard enough to know his sister was no longer alone with Rick, but the officers didn't seem to have the relief he had hoped for. Their expressions were grim as they walked through the door to Grace's room. Charlie didn't know exactly what they found, but the look on the officer's face when he came out said it all. The shock, the disbelief. It was as if they had just uncovered something unspeakable. Charlie clutched his pillow, holding back tears. He wasn't sure what happened, but he knew his life, and Grace's, was about to change forever. The house was eerily quiet now. The usual noise of the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking in the kitchen, and the faint shuffle of the neighbors across the street were gone. It was as if time had stopped. In the living room, Charlie sat on the couch, his legs pulled up tightly against his chest. His hands shook, his eyes darting from one corner of the room to the next. Every sound, every shift in the air made him tense, as if he were waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The police had arrived, and then everything became a blur. Officers had taken Grace into another room, asking her questions. There were murmurs of concern, but Charlie could hear nothing clearly. He was too far away, his heart pounding in his chest like it might explode. He wanted to be with her, he wanted to protect her, to make sure she was okay, but the officers had told him to stay put. And then the door to the room opened again, and a detective stepped out. His face was unreadable, but Charlie could tell from the way he moved that something serious was going on. "Is she all right?" Charlie whispered, standing up, his voice trembling. He wasn't sure who he was asking, the detective, the officer, himself. He didn't even know what all right meant anymore. The detective glanced down at him. His eyes were kind, but the seriousness of his demeanor was impossible to ignore. "She's going to be okay, Charlie. We're going to make sure of that." The words hit Charlie like a punch to the gut. She was going to be okay? Was that the truth? Or was it just something adults said when they didn't want to tell the whole story? Charlie wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but he felt so small in that moment, so powerless. Rick was still in the house. The officers had restrained him, but they hadn't taken him away yet. Charlie could feel the tension in the air, thick like fog. It was a kind of tension he had never felt before, a kind that made his skin crawl. Rick had always been difficult to understand. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his voice was cold. And when he got angry, it was like a switch flipped inside him. Charlie had seen the anger in his eyes on more than one occasion, but it had never been directed at him. Not until now. Grace had always tried to shield him from it. She'd make excuses when Rick would snap at them, telling Charlie it was just the stress of work or the pressure of life. She would smile and act like everything was fine, but Charlie wasn't stupid. He knew it wasn't right, but he never imagined it would come to this. Never in his wildest dreams did he think Rick would do something so horrible. The detective stood up, taking a deep breath as he looked toward the front door. "Charlie," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I need you to understand that what happened tonight was very serious. We're going to make sure that your sister is safe, and that you are too." Charlie swallowed hard, trying to understand the weight of the words. What did that mean for them? What would happen to Grace? What would happen to him? "Where's Rick now?" Charlie asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The detective sighed, running a hand through his hair. "He's been arrested, Charlie. He won't hurt anyone again." Charlie nodded, though the words didn't bring him the comfort he had hoped for. The man he had once thought of as a father, who had married his mother and moved into their home, was now gone, arrested, taken away by the police, just like a criminal. It didn't make sense to him. It felt like his entire world was collapsing, the foundation of everything he thought he knew, crumbling beneath him. At that moment, the front door opened again. 2 officers walked in, and behind them was Grace. She was pale, her eyes red from crying, her clothes disheveled. Charlie's heart skipped a beat as he saw her standing there, her face tired but relieved. She looked so fragile, like she was about to break into a million pieces. Grace's eyes met Charlie's, and for a moment, they just stared at each other, both of them uncertain about what to say or do. It had always been just the two of them. Their mother was gone, and Rick had never really been part of their world until he had shown up and tried to change everything. Finally, Grace stepped forward, her voice soft and shaking. "Charlie, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to know any of this." Charlie didn't know what to say. What could he say? The hurt, the betrayal. It was too much. He could see the guilt in her eyes, but he knew it wasn't her fault. She had done what she could to protect him. She always had. "It's not your fault," Charlie whispered, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside of him. "You kept me safe. You always do." Grace sank into a chair, her head in her hands. The tears came again, but this time, they weren't just for herself. They were for everything. For the shattered dream of a family that had never really existed. For the man who had betrayed their trust. For the fear they had both lived with for so long, but had never truly understood until now. The detective gave them space, his eyes softening as he watched the siblings share a quiet moment. He understood that there was no simple fix for what had happened, no easy way to heal the wounds that had been inflicted tonight. But he also knew that Charlie and Grace were survivors, and with time, they would find their way through this. Charlie looked back at Grace, his heart heavy with worry for her. But he also felt something else, something small but powerful: hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: they would face it together. The next few days felt like a blur for Charlie and Grace. After the police had taken Rick away, the house was quiet, too quiet. Charlie kept waiting for the familiar sound of Rick's voice, the way he would grumble when he was frustrated, or how he would shout at the TV when his favorite show didn't go the way he wanted. But those sounds never came. Instead, there was silence, a heavy, uncomfortable silence that seemed to linger in every corner of the house. Grace didn't leave her room much. She would go to the kitchen for food, but only when she thought Charlie wasn't watching. She seemed lost in her own world, her eyes distant, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd always been the strong one, the one who held it all together, the one who kept going no matter how tough things got. But now, Charlie could see the cracks. He could see the toll it had taken on her, and it made his heart ache. Charlie didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to make things better for her. He just knew that he had to try. He had to be there for her, just like she had always been there for him. That evening, after dinner, Charlie sat on the couch, the TV playing in the background but his attention elsewhere. Grace was sitting at the table, staring at her hands, lost in thought. He could see the worry lines on her face, the same ones their mother used to have when things weren't right. "Grace," he said quietly, not sure how to start the conversation. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond right away. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Then, she looked up at him, her eyes tired but soft. "I don't know, Charlie," she said with a sigh, her voice breaking. "I really don't know." Charlie felt his stomach twist. He hated seeing her like this, vulnerable and scared. Grace had always been the one who comforted him, who told him that everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. Now she was the one who needed comforting, and Charlie wasn't sure how to give it to her. "I'm here," he said softly, as if that could fix everything. "I won't leave you. I'll be here." Grace smiled weakly at him, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know, Charlie, I know." She paused, her gaze falling to the floor. "But I don't know how we're supposed to move on from this. I don't know what comes next." Charlie didn't have an answer. He was just a 7-year-old boy, after all. How could he possibly know what to do in a situation like this? But he knew one thing: they weren't alone anymore. The police had made sure of that. They had promised Grace that she would be safe, and no matter how difficult it might seem, they would find a way to get through this. The days that followed were filled with legal proceedings, police interviews, and therapists who came to talk to them. Grace was often too quiet, too withdrawn. Charlie wanted to talk to her, wanted to find a way to make her smile again, but he didn't know how. So, he did what he could. He stayed close, helping her with the little things, getting her a glass of water, offering to read her favorite book, trying to distract her with silly jokes, even though they didn't seem to make her laugh anymore. Then came the day when the official word came in. Rick had been charged with multiple offenses, and he would be facing serious consequences. The news hit them both hard, though neither of them showed it outwardly. Grace's face remained blank, like she was trying to hold back any emotion that threatened to break through. Charlie could see that she was struggling, though. She didn't want to show it, but he could tell. She was torn between relief, because Rick was gone, and the guilt that came with knowing what had happened. The guilt that she hadn't been able to protect herself, or him. It was a tough pill to swallow for both of them. One afternoon, a social worker came by to check in on them. She was kind, her words gentle, as she explained that they would need to start looking at options for where Grace and Charlie could live. The house, though still technically theirs, wasn't a safe space anymore. Rick had destroyed the feeling of home. Charlie didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to think about leaving. This house had always been their home, the place where they'd grown up. It felt wrong to even consider leaving, but Grace seemed to take it in stride. She asked questions, listened carefully, as if she was already bracing herself for the inevitable. Charlie, on the other hand, just wanted things to go back to the way they were, before Rick, before all of this. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the room grew darker, Grace pulled him close and held him. For a long moment, they just sat there in the quiet of the living room, Charlie's head resting on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Charlie frowned, looking up at her confused. "Sorry for what?" "For everything," she said, her voice breaking again. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I wanted to protect you, Charlie. I thought I was doing enough. I thought I could keep you safe." Charlie shook his head, his heart aching. "You did, Grace. You always did." Grace wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "I don't know how we're going to get through this, but I do know one thing. We'll do it together." Charlie nodded, a quiet sense of hope stirring in his chest. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing about what had happened would ever be easy to forget. But they had each other. And for the first time in days, Charlie allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new routine for Charlie and Grace. The memories of that night still haunted them, lingering like shadows that never seemed to disappear, but with each passing day, they found small ways to heal. The house was still empty without Rick's presence, but there was a peace in the air now, a quiet comfort that hadn't been there before. Grace had found a new strength, one that Charlie had never seen before. She began to take charge of their lives in a way that was both reassuring and awe-inspiring. It wasn't easy. There were nights when she cried in the quiet of her room, but during the day, she was the one who took the lead. She handled the calls from lawyers, the meetings with social workers, and the countless other tasks that had once seemed impossible. And through it all, she kept reassuring Charlie that everything would be okay, even when she wasn't sure herself. For Charlie, it was harder. He still had nightmares about that night. He still heard the sounds of his sister's scream echoing in his mind. But slowly, he began to feel safe again. It wasn't just because of the police or the social workers, though. It was because of Grace. Her presence was his anchor, the steadying force that kept him grounded when everything else seemed to be spinning out of control. One day, they were sitting in the kitchen, sharing a quiet lunch, when Grace looked across the table at Charlie. her eyes soft with emotion. "You know, we've been through a lot, Charlie," she said, her voice full of resolve. "But we're going to be okay. We're going to rebuild our lives. We'll take it one day at a time, but we're going to make it through." Charlie smiled, a small but genuine smile. He believed her. He knew that with Grace by his side, they could face whatever came next. They didn't need Rick. They didn't need the fear that had once hung over their heads like a storm cloud. They had each other, and that was enough. As time went on, they moved to a new apartment, one that felt like a fresh start. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The neighborhood was quieter, the air felt cleaner, and Charlie could breathe a little easier. They started to make new friends, and though their past would always be a part of them, they found a way to move forward, together. Grace eventually found work at a local store, and Charlie started school again, this time with a little more confidence. The memories of the past would always be there, but they didn't have to define their future. One night, as Charlie lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about everything that had happened. He thought about the fear and the confusion, the feeling of being utterly helpless. But then he thought about Grace, about how she had fought for him, how she had protected him, even when she was scared. And he knew, in his heart, that they had made it through the hardest part. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. It was about finding peace, about rediscovering hope in a world that had seemed so dark for so long. And as he closed his eyes, drifting into sleep, he whispered softly to himself, "We're going to be okay." Thank you for listening to Charlie and Grace's story. If you found inspiration in their journey, in the resilience and strength they showed when everything seemed lost, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Stories of Hope. Your support helps us share more real-life stories that inspire and uplift others. Join us again for more powerful stories of courage, survival, and the unwavering bond of family.